You can almost smell the tallow before you see it, the thick animal smoke clinging to your lungs as if the air itself disapproves of what's about to happen. The candles burn low, sputtering against the damp chill, and somewhere beyond the walls, laughter turns to chanting. You are standing in a room that feels too small for what it's meant to contain: a covenant, a body, a future none of them chose. Before we step deeper into this night, take a breath and look around wherever you are watching from, whether it's a quiet bedroom in London, a train in Seoul, or a late-night kitchen in São Paulo. Isn't it strange how we gather here, across centuries and screens, to remember those who lived and suffered in shadows? Tap that like button, subscribe if you love peeling back the layers of lost history, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Now, let's return to England, the 15th century, where candles guttered not just from wind, but from the weight of custom. The cottage is silent, save for the scrape of wood and the wheeze of an old door. On a narrow bed draped with coarse linen, a girl no older than 12 sits motionless. Her name is Margaret Beaufort. The gown they've laced her into gleams faintly in the firelight, embroidered silk that hangs too heavily from her slight frame. Outside, men with red faces and ale-thick laughter wait for the sound of a confirmation, the evidence that a marriage has been made real. This was the law, the faith, and the custom of the realm, that a wedding was incomplete until the bride's innocence was broken and her blood bore witness to it. A girl's silence held less weight than the stain on the sheet. And so the world watched, and the church nodded, and the nobility drank to a child's ruin in the name of legacy. Marriage, in the medieval mind, was never truly about love. It was a contract of property and purity, sealed in flesh. Even kings were bound by it. Priests spoke of it as holy sacrament. Yet it was a holiness heavy with fear. To deny the ritual was to deny God's order. To resist it was to risk damnation. Margaret's husband, Edmund Tudor, was 24. To him, this was duty, a bond sanctioned by both law and ambition. To her, it was a sentence she could not read but could feel tightening around her wrists like the silk sleeves that bound her hands. She said little, though one account would later whisper that she spoke with a composure beyond her years. Perhaps she understood what few around her did, that survival in such a world was an act of endurance, not rebellion. Outside, the voices grew louder. A priest murmured blessings. Someone laughed too long, and in that cramped, suffocating space, Margaret Beaufort crossed the line between childhood and history. The medieval wedding night was not merely a private ordeal. It was a public spectacle of legitimacy. In noble halls, witnesses might even be stationed outside the door, straining to hear the proof. In some courts of Europe, bedsheets were displayed as evidence the following morning, paraded as symbols of honor. How strange that faith could sanctify humiliation. How strange that holiness demanded pain. What must it have felt like? The linen scratching at her neck, the air thick with smoke and expectation. Did she pray for deliverance, or simply endure in silence the way so many did? Centuries later, chroniclers would write of her piety, her brilliance, her unshakable will, but none would speak of this night, of the girl trapped in silk, holding her breath as the future pressed down. By morning, the chants outside had faded to snores. The fire had burned to ash. Margaret was no longer just a girl. She was now a wife, a vessel for dynasty. Within a year, she would be a mother, at 13, and within another, a widow. This is where the Tudor story begins, not with triumph, not with coronation, but with a child forced into the rituals of adulthood. The same empire that would later glorify kings and queens was built on the backs of girls like her, offered as proof that God's will was done. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the thatched roof. The chanting had stopped. In its place came a quieter sound, the rustle of fabric, the breath of a girl staring at the ceiling, realizing she would never again be seen as one. The candles had burned themselves to nothing. And in the cold morning light, history took its first breath, silent, trembling, and bound in silk. The monastery bells toll in the darkness, the sound rolling like thunder through the stone corridors. Each strike carries with it the weight of centuries, of rules written in ink and blood, of questions that no one dared ask aloud. In these cloisters, where candlelight trembles against painted saints, men speak of the soul as if they have seen it, and of the body as if it were a wild creature that must be tamed. Here, in the flicker of wax and smoke, desire becomes a thing to be charted, measured, and feared. Physicians, their hands smelling of ink and herbs, copy the words of Galen, the ancient authority who taught that woman was simply a lesser version of man, colder, wetter, unfinished. The body, they said, reflected divine order. To touch it without sanction was to stir the chaos of creation itself. In the scriptorium, Brother Thomas bends over his parchment. He copies carefully from a crumbling text. A woman's womb may wander the body when neglected, choking her heart, blinding her reason. His quill hesitates. The words sound absurd, yet the authority behind them is unassailable. He dips the quill again and continues, whispering under his breath, "So we write, and so we believe." To question such truths was dangerous. Knowledge itself was a battlefield, where medicine and faith clashed, and the casualties were human lives. The Church claimed dominion over flesh and spirit alike. Priests preached that even within marriage the act of pleasure was perilous unless purified by intent, not for joy, but for the making of life. Some went further, counting the permitted days for union, dividing calendars between holy and unholy time. How does one measure sin in hours and days? How does one weigh the human heartbeat against the ticking of sacred law? Confession became the microscope of morality. Behind closed doors, priests probed not just the conscience but the body's every secret. Manuals for confessors circulated. On the sin of lust, instructing them how to interrogate without corrupting themselves. One text from Paris advised, "Ask not too directly lest the penitent's detail provoke the imagination." Yet they always asked, always imagined, always judged. In the infirmaries, where candlelight met the scent of vinegar and blood, women came seeking remedies for ailments the Church refused to name. Their bodies were mysteries to the men who claimed mastery over them. If a woman wept or fell ill, some whispered of a wandering womb, that the uterus had risen toward her lungs, suffocating her reason. Physicians prescribed smoke, baths, or worse, the scent of burning flesh to guide the womb back down. Others blamed demons. In the dark hours before dawn, the monks wrote of creatures that visited sleepers, incubi and succubi, spirits that drained the body's virtue through pleasure. The line between dream and damnation blurred until fear itself became a doctrine. A tale from the Rhineland told of a young novice who woke each night to find her sheets damp with tears. She swore an unseen hand caressed her in her sleep, and though she prayed, the visions returned. Her confessor, trembling with both pity and suspicion, wrote, "Either she is visited by a spirit of lust or by the shadow of her own imagination. Which is worse?" The girl was sent away, her fate unrecorded. Such stories multiplied. The body, once seen as God's creation, had become his testing ground. Every sensation risked accusation. Every touch could be sin. Yet beneath this lattice of fear, the world continued its quiet rebellion. Midwives kept their own knowledge of herbs, cycles, and anatomy, passed in whispers from mother to daughter. They knew truths the priests could not bear to name. In hidden rooms they mapped the female form not as sin, but as survival. Their remedies soothed where prayers failed. Their hands stitched where faith had cut. But the Church was listening. Every candle in the convent cast two shadows, one for the body, one for the sin it might conceal. And when the Inquisition rose, those shadows became flames. Women who understood too much were called witches. Men who questioned too deeply were branded heretics. Brother Thomas would one day see his own writings burned, the ink blistering into illegible ghosts. But tonight, in the quiet of the scriptorium, he looks again at his line, "So we write, and so we believe." The candle guttered low, its wax running like tears across the desk. Outside, the wind carried the smell of ash and incense, a mingling of the sacred and the profane. Somewhere in the dark, another bell began to toll, and as the echoes fade, one can almost hear the question the monks never dared to ask aloud. If the soul is so holy, why must the body always pay the price? The pestle grinds slowly against the mortar, a wet, rhythmic sound that fills the quiet of a stone cottage. Outside, the forest breathes in the pale shimmer of moonlight. A woman kneels by the hearth, her hands dusted green from crushed leaves, her whispers weaving through the smoke. Part prayer, part spell. The words shift between Latin and something older, a language never written, remembered only by women who heal, bleed, and survive. Her name could be Annie, Alice, Isabeau, or Marjorie. She is both every woman and no one, a shadow among the living. In her hands lies both mercy and danger, the power to heal a fever, to end a pregnancy, to still a life before it begins. For this, she is both needed and feared. In medieval Europe, flesh was never just flesh, it was theology in motion. The Church's gaze reached from altar to marriage bed, dictating what could be touched, when, and why. Priests thundered that desire was a gate to damnation, while confessors catalogued sins of the body with almost scientific precision. And yet, behind closed doors, the world's heartbeat refused to obey. In manors and monasteries alike, bodies continued their rebellion. In the silence of the cloister, monks copied sermons about chastity while struggling with the same dreams they condemned. In the fields, peasants whispered blessings over each other's hands, finding solace where Scripture offered shame. In the court of a nobleman, a physician prescribed ground pearls to cool the humors of lust, even as the Lord's mistress laughed quietly in the next room. Fear became the empire's most enduring currency. The Church warned that sin began not in action, but in thought. "Guard the eyes," they said, "for the devil enters through sight." And so, a woman walking alone at dusk became an omen. A midwife's herb pouch became proof of sorcery. Even childbirth, the most human of all acts, could be twisted into evidence of corruption. In a village near Rouen, a healer named Perrine was once called to aid a noble's wife who had labored 3 days without rest. She mixed crushed fennel, rosemary, and blessed thistle, murmuring to the Virgin for strength. The baby lived, the mother did not. Within a week, Perrine was accused of invoking forbidden spirits. A witness swore he'd seen her speak to the moon. Under torture, she confessed to everything they demanded, that her herbs whispered secrets, that her hands knew too much. She was burned on the eve of Lent. The irony was terrible. Those who gave life were punished as if they had stolen it. In these centuries of suspicion, knowledge itself became contraband. Women who passed recipes for healing or herbs for easing pain did so in coded language. A sprig of rue tied with red thread meant protection. Tansy leaves pressed between pages meant silence. They carried wisdom older than the Church, inherited through touch and memory, not ink. Yet men, too, were caught in this machinery of fear. Theologians debated endlessly. Could pleasure exist without sin? Could a husband love his wife without damning them both? The answers shifted like smoke. Some wrote that Adam's fall began with Eve's gaze. Others swore the devil lingered in the womb, waiting to be reborn. In confessionals, 1,000 trembling voices sought forgiveness for what nature itself demanded. Still, desire endured. It hid in the dark corners of taverns, in the long glance exchanged over candlelight, in the soft laughter behind heavy curtains. It whispered through poems written in secret, verses that dared to describe touch as sacred, not shameful. The poets of the later Middle Ages, from Chaucer to Villon, laced their words with irony and tenderness, hinting that love might be divine precisely because it was forbidden. The more the Church tried to silence the body, the louder its echoes became. Even the instruments of repression, confession, surveillance, public punishment, only deepened humanity's fascination with what it tried to deny. Every accusation of witchcraft revealed not only fear of evil, but terror of freedom, that within each person lay an ungovernable hunger the Church could not sanctify. In a cathedral in Avignon, a friar once wrote, "We chase sin from flesh, yet it returns in thought. We chase it from thought, yet it returns in dream. What, then, is man?" Perhaps that is the truth the medieval world could never bear to face, that flesh and faith were never enemies, only mirrors reflecting the same desperate longing, to be seen, to be forgiven, to be touched without fear. The woman by the hearth finishes her work. She pours the crushed herbs into a bowl of steaming water, the scent of sage and blood mingling in the air. A soft knock sounds at the door, cautious, hurried. She hesitates, listening to the wind. The moonlight flickers across her face, and for an instant her eyes seem to hold both defiance and dread. Outside, a dog barks in the distance. A church bell tolls once, faint and hollow. She rises slowly, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the dark.